Luc Besson, the director behind iconic films like Leon the Professional, La Femme Nikita, and The Fifth Element, is tackling a story we've seen done many times before, Dracula. Is this one gonna be eternal, or does it suck? I mean, come on, you know I had to go for the puns here. When a 15th century prince denounces God after the loss of his wife, he inherits an eternal curse, becoming Dracula. Condemned to wander the centuries, he defies fate and death, guided by a single hope, to be reunited with his lost love. This stars Caleb Landry Jones, Christoph Waltz, and Zoe Blue. And while this does deal in the blood-sucking gore of the genre, it also goes for a more stylized sort of romantic drama. Now, Jones is the Count, and when his wife, played by Blue, dies, he curses God and ends up being cursed himself. Now, then you fast forward several hundred years, and Dracula's search for his wife gets new hope as he meets a young woman named Mina who looks exactly like his lost love. Now, if you're anticipating this movie for the horror or the thrills aspect, go watch a different vampire flick. This one is patient, dramatically based, and centers around a romance. Now, there are some violent scenes that showcase the pointy-toothed undead feasting on mortals, but these aren't prevalent, and many times the camera actually turns away when extreme violence is occurring. This 2-hour and 9-minute movie is a complete waste of time. The story jumps around in its progression, creating awkward contexts and an incohesive narrative structure. Now first, with a lot of the dialogue, I couldn't tell if this was going for sarcastic comedy or dry wit, but it was misplaced for the tone of the film. Then the writing itself, it's so simplified and basic in parts that it feels like it was taken from a rough draft. Now, as an example, at the very beginning of the film, when Jones is getting ready to head off to a battle, he explicitly tells his priest bishopy dude that God must protect his wife at all costs, and nothing else matters other than her life and safety. Now sure, you could call this foreshadowing, except there's no shadow. It is a sledgehammer of obviousness crashing down on our heads, and the scenes don't get much better. Even with talent like Christoph Waltz, as he plays this priest who's been tracking the lore of vampires, his dialogue and line delivery come across as flippant and smug, but not in any sort of endearing or even quirky manner. It's as though he was acting in a different film about the same subject, and then his scenes were smashed into this one. Also involving the writing, this could have been titled Exposition the Movie, because too many scenes are filled with the characters talking about actions rather than creating any movement. And don't hear me say I was hoping for fight sequences or acrobatics, nor do I despise conversational scenes. But so many times this involved the characters describing what could have been shown visually to us, which would have been way more engaging to take in. From a filmmaking and technical standpoint, there are some creative transitions and effects that are used to blend time periods. And these looked good, but they were jarring, just breaking the illusion of watching a period piece, which all this had actually been staged as. There is an extremely well choreographed dance sequence that illustrates the passage of time and Dracula's search. In this instance, we're given the visuals to go along with the dialogue, rather than just the dull speech devoid of any actions. And there are even some special effects that look halfway decent. I mean, some of the wounds that people receive, they're realistic, with physics and movements that complement the violence. And there are even some CGI creature additions within Dracula's castle. And while these are fine, there's nothing terribly special about them. But I do have one major, and I mean major, bone to pick with their inclusion. There is zero background on how or why they appear. We're just inside the castle during a scene, and we get to see all these things traipsing about. Okay, fine, I can kind of go with that, even though it would be kind of like watching a Smurf wander through the set, say hey to Drac, and then nobody bats an eye. But to make this even more confusing and annoying comes at the very end of the film, when we get to see the aftermath of a certain battle. Now, the creatures, they have a new look, and again, how and why it needs to be addressed. You can't just insert something like this into the storytelling and have it make sense. And I really want to say explicitly what I'm referring to, but I am trying to avoid some spoilers, even though this is a terrible film. And for me, it's kind of a final nail in the coffin. You know, another pun. The story employs a sort of circular logic to justify itself, which I guess if you aren't paying attention, it's not too bothersome. But for the majority that look forward to a creative and even impacting story, this shat the bed. I'm going to attempt to be vague here, with enough context that you get what I'm talking about without actually giving portions away. So we're going to see how this goes. This is presented as a romance, a pining love story where the one left alive endures the agony of time to search for his love. Okay, cool, a tale I can get behind. But when Dracula continues his search, at some point we hope he'll actually succeed and find his wife, or at least the reincarnated version of her. And that would also make for a satisfying resolution to a romance. Long-lost love reunited after centuries. Cool, I'm liking this. Now imagine that it takes the reincarnate some convincing to understand, even accept that perhaps she could be the dead wife. The emotional struggle and internal wrangling to wrap her head around this concept, and then if she buys it and then adopts the mindset of her past life, do they ride off into the sunset happily ever after? Or does Dracula then make a decision that appears to be selfless and compassionate on the surface, but in reality is extremely cruel and torturous? This is where the circular logic comes into play. Events come to fruition because of a seemingly noble motive, but wreak havoc and loss when they don't need to, had the actions just not been taken in the first place, especially if the outcome would come about so quickly and then without a fight. Clear as mud? Okay, I understand what Besson was going for. In some ways, he did accomplish it. This is a stylized look at the Dracula story, with modern touches inside a traditional facade. And the different take on the portrayal of the Count, it's also a little new, having him be more forlorn and melancholy, but never ending in his search. I wasn't completely enthralled with Jones's performance, but he wasn't bad, and he certainly nailed the depressed look. But with overly simplified dialogue, a storytelling progression that feels slapped together rather than a well-thought-out sequence, story elements that are awkwardly and inexplicably inserted, and then a pace that's like paint drying, there's very little that makes this worthy of a watch. There's sex, no nudity, no profanity, then some violence. I give Dracula, it sucks, 1.5 out of 5 couches. I mean, I'd rather rewatch all of the Twilight films than have to experience this one again. Okay, do you have a favorite vampire film? There are a ton of them, so let me know what you love in the comments below. If you enjoyed this review, please give it a like. Also, don't forget to share and subscribe. I'm Chris. This is Movies and Munchies. Thanks for couching with me.